poem all about then? A man goes for a walk one evening, hears a thrush singing, and decides that it's spring. This realization makes him start to feel happy. And that, in a nutshell, is what happens in the poem. Before we get started, let's look at some key biographical details for Philip Larkin. He was born in 1922 and passed away in 1984. He was a prolific writer and penned both poems and novels. However, he became primarily known for his poetry, including collections such as The Whitsun Weddings and High Window. He also wrote a very famous poem called This Be the Verse that you might have heard of, which explores the sometimes dysfunctional relationship between parents and children. Larkin's poetry is generally considered to be melancholy in tone, a little bit somber, a little bit pessimistic, and unsurprisingly, he disliked the limelight. Nevertheless, his reputation grew during his lifetime up until the present time, and he's considered by many to be one of the foremost English poets. As you can see, the poem Coming is relatively short. It's made up of 19 lines and it's one single stanza. I will go into this in more detail. It doesn't have a regular rhyming scheme, nor does it have a regular rhythm or meter. I would say the poem is largely iambic in that it consists of a unstressed, stressed pattern throughout, but again, this is not rigidly in place. I'm going to start off by reading the first 4 lines. On longer evenings, light, chill and yellow bathes the serene foreheads of houses. The function of these 4 lines really is to set the scene. Where are we? Somewhere in suburbia, significantly a longer evening, which suggests that spring is on its way in the northern hemisphere. There's still enough light left to bathe the serene foreheads of houses, amplified by the verb bathe, which we might associate with a parent caring for a child. Nevertheless, in line 2, the adjective chill undercuts this warm, positive mood. Similarly, the word evening, with its connotations of something coming to an end, the end of the day, perhaps life itself, reinforces this impression, so that we're left with an ambiguous mood at the start of the poem. Moving on to section 2, lines 5 to 9. A thrush sings, laurel surrounded in the deep bare garden, its fresh peeled voice astonishing the brickwork. Line 5 contains the pivotal moment in the poem, in that the sound of the thrush singing triggers the memories and recollections of childhood that drive the poem and bring it towards its conclusion. We also have some further development of the setting. We can't see the thrush, but we can hear it, and its voice seems to be emanating from a garden that is deep and bare, perhaps because it's the start of spring and things haven't started growing yet. Also, the adjective deep conveys a feeling of mystery, something unknown. Laurel surrounded, laurel is a type of tree. In contrast to the relatively simple adjective deep and bare, we have this original choice of word fresh peeled to describe the thrush's voice. This reminds me of a freshly peeled fruit, so that there's a raw, refreshing quality to the thrush's song. So much so that it astonishes the brickwork, so the personification that was begun in the previous lines is extended here, with the houses going from serene in lines 1 to 4 to being astonished. Here Larkin is inviting us to view the houses as living entities, perhaps sharing in the surprise that the speaker feels upon hearing the thrush's song. Lines 10 and 11 are repeated. It will be spring soon, it will be spring soon. And I think there's a number of different ways that we can read these lines. First of all, who's speaking or thinking these lines? Is it the speaker upon hearing the thrush's song? Is it the astonished brickwork, continuing the theme of personification? Is it the poet attempting to mimic the sound of birdsong? So all of these are possibilities. Nevertheless, the key message here is that spring is on its way. You might notice that the punctuation differs. Line 11 contains a hyphen or a pause at the end of it. Perhaps this is to show the speaker pausing as he recollects the past and his childhood memories come flooding back. There's also the use of sibilants here, the repeated S sound. Perhaps this is intended once again to mimic the sound of the thrush singing, or perhaps it's used to impart a somewhat ominous or sinister tone. That's typically what sibilance is used for. And I, whose childhood was a forgotten boredom, feel like a child. The sound of the birdsong makes the speaker recollect his own childhood, and he uses this simple but effective metaphor to convey the idea that it was a rather dull period in his life. The first person is used here for the first time, which makes sense really because the poet is relating a personal memory from childhood. The poem continues by developing the simile that was introduced in line 14, feel like a child, who comes on a scene of adult reconciling and can understand nothing but the unusual laughter. He compares the way that he's feeling now to the way that he felt as a child when he came across some adults, possibly his parents, making up after a fight, and part of that making up was to laugh. However, he uses the adjective unusual that makes us think, why was it unusual? Is it because they often didn't make up and therefore didn't laugh? Was the laughter itself a little bit odd? And perhaps here Larkin wants to highlight how adult behavior is often quite confusing for children. They don't really understand what the adults are doing, and he says so himself, understands nothing. However, the sound of the laughter is what stays with him. Clearly, this laughter has uplifted him, has improved his mood to the point that he begins to feel happy. Does it end positively or not? I think there's a couple of ways that we can interpret this. First of all, it does end with the adjective happy. That's the word that remains with us. It's the last word of the poem, and perhaps Larkin does this deliberately to make sure that that's the impression that we carry away with us. I think it's interesting here that it's quite a childlike adjective as well. He has taken us back to his childhood, so perhaps that's just an additional way to emphasize that journey back in time. On the other hand, my personal opinion here, I think that it's not as straightforward as that. If we look at the line, starts to be happy, he's not happy yet. He's getting there, or he's beginning the process of feeling happy, which links in with the title, Coming. Maybe it's the happiness that's coming as well as the coming of spring. I don't know that I would call the tone of this poem happy. I think I'd be more inclined to go for hopeful. He definitely doesn't end the poem saying, I'm absolutely miserable, this is terrible. Nor does he say, I am happy, starts to feel happy. It's quite reserved, it's quite tentative. He's picking his words very carefully here, and I think that that's quite typical of a lot of Larkin's verse as well. It's taken him 19 lines to start to feel happy. This is clearly a speaker who is quite measured with his emotions and who doesn't just experience intense emotions, or at the very least he doesn't declare that he does. In terms of the key devices that he uses, we've already mentioned the use of personification in the first couple of lines of the poem. His lexical choices, the verbs and the adjectives are quite simple, but then we have that unusual choice, the fresh peeled voice of the thrush. We also have the imagery that he conjures, the laurel surrounded garden. It's deep, it's bare. He describes his childhood as a forgotten boredom, using a powerful metaphor there. He also uses an extended simile to describe the way he feels when he comes across that scene of the adults reconciling. He also uses the first person. There's also some sound imagery in the use of sibilant. In terms of the themes explored, spring, of course, it's a season of hope and renewal. Nature has the ability to lift the spirit. Childhood is a confusing time, and of course the power of memory and how a simple sound can trigger recollections from the past. Thank you for watching this analysis of Philip Larkin's poem, Coming. I hope you found it useful, and if you did, don't forget to hit the subscribe button now so that you don't miss any new videos. I upload new videos every Sunday. Thank you, and see you next time.